Good morning, everyone. We're going to start in about 30 seconds to a minute. So stay tuned. We're almost there. Give a few more seconds for all participants to join, and then we'll get started. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the introductions while the rest of the attendees come in. So good morning, everyone in Pacific time, and good afternoon and good night to all others. My name is Nelson Granados, and I'm the Professor of Information Systems, Technology Management, and Digital Innovation. I'm also the Executive Director of the Institute for Entertainment, Media, Sports, and Culture at Pepperdine University. I will be moderating today's discussion. The name of the session is Navigating an Uncertain Future in Live Events. It's a topic that is very current. In fact, there's a lot of interest in it. News are happening by the minute. And we have attendees from all over the world, including South America and Europe today, given the interest on the topic. So to introduce the session, let me just point a couple of tips here. Last Sunday, Germany's soccer Bundesliga restarted with no spectators. The NFL, the MLB, English Premier Soccer League, and many other leagues have opened for training in the last few days. Meanwhile, production of film and TV has started in places like Europe and New Zealand, with the US soon to follow. In fact, just yesterday, California Governor Gavin Newsom said the state would release guidelines on Monday to open film and TV production. There are so many questions on how to make it happen in a safe manner for spectators, players, coaches, artists, and directors. For now, it looks like many live events will soon happen without spectators. So for how long? What will be the new normal for live events, pre-COVID vaccine and post-COVID vaccine? And what exactly will a post-COVID live event look like? So today we bring two experts and visionaries for live events who are on top of all of these developments. They have to make important decisions, whether they're representing NFL players or making plans to shoot a live production. And together they bring about 70 years of valuable experience to help us navigate the developments for live events and to help us form an outlook for the future as live entertainment restarts. So first we have Lee Steinberg. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning.
So Lee is one of the most recognized sport agents. He has represented players and coaches across many sports, including NFL quarterbacks, Troy Aikman and Steve Young, and boxer Oscar De La Hoya, as well as many Olympians. Some of his current clients include Patrick Mahomes and watch the pronunciation here, Tua Tagovailoa. He has secured $3 billion for many of these athletes, more than 300 professional athletes. And so after this webinar, you may want to watch the movie Jerry Maguire because it was inspired by Lee. Or you may also want to read his best-selling book, Winning with Integrity, or his most recent one called The Agent, 40-Year Career of Making Deals and Changing the Game. And we also have Valerie Benning-Thompson. Good morning, Valerie.
Good morning.
So Valerie is a live event producer and entertainment veteran. During her career, she has produced or managed over 25 stadium, arena, and theatrical tours nationally and internationally for artists such as Luther Vandross, Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Prince, the World Cup opening ceremony, and the Centennial Olympics. She's also a sought-after comedy variety producer, having created TV specials for Kevin Hart, Mike Epps, Eddie Griffin, and the Shaquille O'Neal All-Star Comedy Jam. Valerie is currently the tour producer of Nick Cannon's Wild 'N Out live tour. So as you can see, great experience. I feel like we're gonna have a great discussion. I see it as a brainstorming session because there's so much that's happening on this front and so fluid that, so let's just gather together and try to figure out as much as we can given the information we have. So we'll go until about 11:45 in terms of the conversation with Lee and Valerie. And then after that, at 11:45, the project manager of the Institute, Amy Zuckerman. Good morning, Amy.
Hi, everybody.
She's going to take over and she's going to moderate the question and answer session. Sorry. All right. So let's just go ahead and start with questions right away. The first one is related to, we're going to do like a past, present, future kind of script or conversation. So the first one for either one of you, whoever feels like is most awake at this point, maybe you can start. So what led you to where you are today, and what are some of the factors for your success? Who wants to start?
Valerie.
Since you're talking, Lee, you go.
So I grew up with a father in Southern California who emphasized two important values. One is treasuring relationships, especially family. And the second was to try to make a meaningful difference in the lives of others and help people who couldn't help themselves. So I went up to school at Berkeley in the tumultuous 60s. I was student body president when Ronald Reagan was the governor. I learned everything I needed to learn about negotiating. Every time we went out and demonstrated, he cracked down, and we had some interesting discussions. I was a dorm counselor in an undergraduate dorm, and they moved the freshman football team while I was in law school into the dorm. One of the students was Steve Bartkowski, and in 1975, he became the first player picked in the first round overall of the NFL draft, and we flew into Bowery's home of Atlanta, and there were Klieg lights at the airport flashing in the sky. A huge crowd was pressed up against the police line, and the first thing we heard was, "We interrupt the Johnny Carson show to bring you a special news bulletin. Steve Bartkowski and his attorney have just arrived at the Atlanta airport. We switch you live for an in-depth interview." Well, it was the first time I saw the idol worship and veneration that athletes are held in communities across the country. Our practice has been all about athletes retracing their roots and going back to the high school, collegiate, and professional community and setting up scholarship funds, charitable foundations, making an impact. So I think the secret in all of life is listening skills. If you can create enough trust and space with another human being and peel back the layers of the onion so you understand their values and priorities, and put yourself in the heart and mind of another person, know their deepest anxieties and fears and greatest hopes and dreams, then you can navigate your way through life gracefully. And so it's listening, I think, really is the key. And then in our case, we're trying to make a difference in the world. So when the heavyweight champion Lennox Lewis stands up and says, you know, real men don't hit women, it can do more to trigger attitudinal change towards an issue like domestic violence than 1,000 authority figures ever could. So I've been doing this for 46 years. In football, I've done 64 now, first round draft picks, first pick overall 8 times, baseball, basketball, Olympics. But if you wanted a skill set, it's number one, to have values in how you work, to be able to have ethics in how you work, to have a mission in terms of changing the world, and to be a good listener.
Thank you, Lee. Valerie, your turn.
My turn. Okay. I think I started working in entertainment primarily from my sisters. I grew up in a family of entertainment folks, all terms of, can you guys see me?
Yep.
Okay. I grew up with all entertainers in my family, all people in the arts. My parents were designers, clothing designers in the 60s. My father is credited with creating the dashiki, and they were doing costumes for major films back in the 60s and things like that. So I grew up around entertainment all the time, and my father put on different shows and concerts and stuff to really put out music and show off the designs of his clothing. So growing up in an incubator like that, I thought I would study business because my father also was a businessman. So I started trying to figure out what was the business side of this arts game. And my sister was a performer and also a costumer, and she kept pulling me along to work with her. And I started working in Broadway theater first and understanding how the business side of entertainment really worked. And from there, I've been able to create music, film, festivals, and things like that. And I've started to be able to, every 10 to 15 years, I like to change the type of entertainment that I'm working in, because I think that producing is the same over all different genres. If you're producing, I feel like I can produce anything from rap to rodeo and everything in between, because you're just really changing the elements of what it is that you're creating. And being able to create different types of projects are the things that I really enjoy and get a great joy out of watching someone's idea, me being able to take their idea into reality and actually seeing it running live. You know, one of my greatest adventures that I was on was working with then Senator Barack Obama and not having any kind of political understanding at all, but they said, you can put on this event because he's a rock star. So I focused it in that same way that I would do any one of my other artists and handled it that way. And that really solidified for me that people want to see things in an enjoyable way. The message can be delivered cloaked inside of entertainment better than anything else, you know? And now my focus is on comedy. And I think that that really gives me a lot of joy out of all the things that I've done. I worked for a long time in music and producing arena tours and, you know, opening ceremonies and things like that. But the comedy element of it gives me an opportunity to bring joy to different people, no matter their circumstance. The time that they are in that stadium or the arena or watching on television, they can really leave from whatever their circumstances are at that moment and enjoy something, you know, meaningful and have a good time and just laugh and just be able to join with other people and have a similar experience at the same time. So you're seeing young people and old people together just sitting there laughing. And the bigger the project is and the most that it's not, if it hasn't been done before, that's the thing I really am up for that challenge for. I want to create something new and exciting that hasn't been done. And that I think that this coronavirus pandemic is going to give me a big challenge in trying to figure out how we go about presenting comedy now, especially since we really need comedy now. I think that ought to be the first thing to come back, is that we bring back comedy so that people can get past feeling like they've been, you know, enclosed in this thing the whole time. They've not been able to, you know, share a laugh, you know, and comedy is hard to do without an audience. So being able to do it, figuring out a way to do it so the audience can participate in it is going to be our challenge.
Great, thank you. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, live entertainment and sports are coming back. It's in the process of happening, and so I appreciate you sharing where you have been up until now, because I think it's inspiring and educational for everybody in this room, you know, including students, people in the industry, high-level executives. We have quite a mix today. So let's jump now to the present, a little more detail on the present. As live entertainment starts going live, there is the challenge of providing the entertainment in a safe manner. So Tell us what you're working on now and how things have changed for you during the pandemic, I guess, compared to previous experiences. And then more specifically, how has the pandemic affected the industry and your business as you navigate it right now?
Okay. I was presently on a 27-city arena tour, the Nick Cannon Wild 'N Out tour. We were booked in all the major arenas around the country and had done 7 shows on the day that we were shut down. The day that we were stopped, we were loaded in and ready to perform in Baltimore, Maryland. And we were preparing for sound check. The artist had arrived at the venue and we were preparing for sound check. And there was a tug of war that went on between the municipality saying that we could perform and the governor saying we could not. So at that point, I think is when we really realized how serious and how widespread this had become, because when you're traveling around from city to city, a different city every day on a tour bus, you're not necessarily watching the news as much. So you don't really know how things are progressing. You see it on your phone, you might hear it, you say, oh, this virus thing is getting deep, but we're all safe because we're traveling, on our little tour bus and we're in our own little city of about 100, 125 people. So we're not thinking about it. But that day is the day that it really was brought home to us. And we, had to tell everybody, had to call everybody into a room and say, okay, they won't let us perform. So, and now we also have to go home. So we're not touring anymore. And I don't even know when we will be back touring. So having to give that word to everybody, basically I went in and unemployed 125 people and said that we now have to go home. And how do we get home? What is the best way now to send them home? Is it on our buses? Do we put everybody back on planes now? What is the real temperature in the world right now, and how do we navigate that at this moment? Where do we send all of our set pieces? We had all these things planned for the end of the tour, but it had to happen right then, because it's not we could leave it in the arena and figure it out. We had to make a decision that day on what to do and execute it in the same time that we decided what to do, which is very different than how the government runs, but I digress. So we were able to figure that out very quickly and disperse everybody back home safely. And now it's been a waiting game for us to figure out how do we come back. A lot of our shows were very near to being sold out. So now we have, how do we, give this show back to the fans? It's a very popular show and the fans want to see it. And what do we do with it now?
Great. Lee, any comments, any thoughts on what you're doing? Maybe the sports agent or the players angle?
So in the middle of March, every sport that was going shut down. Baseball sent the players home, basketball stopped playing, the NBA, hockey stopped playing. So the challenge is how we bring them back. Now, football, we were in the middle of going through scouting for the NFL draft, which was in late April. And all of a sudden, the entire sport shut down. So the campus visits where scouts and teams come to campus to see players perform were shut down. The visits to NFL facilities were shut down. So the question in a novel quarantine type situation has to be not what you're restricted from, but how can you creatively navigate an approach that still allows you to get the same result. So the first thing that happened is that discussions went to Zoom. We had a player, Tua Tagovailoa, who had a serious hip injury. So he needed the last part of scouting to be able to prove to teams that he was healthy and a good bet for the future. So what we did with my younger attorney, Chris Cabot, is put together a virtual workout. We taped it just as if scouts had been there and sent it to teams. So now when you saw the mobility and the ability to move of Tua, you were not so scared if you were a franchise. We carry out educational situations. So our VP of Media, Julia Farron, did a beautiful job of setting up a virtual agent academy to teach younger people. So we use Zoom. We cut it off at 150 people, but we were able to take them through exercises like how to recruit, how to negotiate, and all the rest of it. Now, as to the rest of the sports, baseball is trying to figure out what they do now, and we're trying to push it, but there's a fight between the union and management. Why is there a fight? Because if we go back with no fans, we still have television revenue, we still have merchandise revenue, but it's a big diminution of income for the sport if you don't have fans there. First. Second of all, no one really knows what happens if you play before no fans, because athletes tend to feed off the energy of the people in the stands. And they're a big factor in a basketball game. They can totally tilt the competitive balance. So let's take football as a sport. Training camps in the NFL would open in August. Training camp by its nature is quarantined. They ship players off to some obscure college or they stay in a hotel. So you can do temperature testing, you can do all sorts of nasal testing and all the rest, and then quarantine someone who's gone. So now we've announced a regular season that will have its regular complement of games. No one precisely knows what the attitude and status of Corona will be in September. So what our governor, Gavin Newsom, is saying is no fans ever, okay? But I think that's a knee-jerk response, and I wish he showed as much creativity in opening the economy as he has in completely obliterating it. So, and people have sat at home loyally and faithfully following the guidelines now for 2 months. And all we get from television is gloom and doom. And all we get from our governmental leaders is more sacrifice, more sacrifice. Franklin Roosevelt, during the Great Depression, said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Where's a message like that? But at any rate, I think that you could have fans if people will be open-minded, because you can temperature test them as they walk into the stadium or arena. You can ask them to wear masks. They wear masks in football in cold weather cities anyway. And you could design a seating chart that socially distances fan groups so that you don't have people. So maybe you can't get 80,000 fans, but you could get 50,000 fans. So you wouldn't drop all the revenue from that. The American people are starved to get sports programming back. I mean, after you've watched Tiger King on Netflix for the third time and saw how ridiculous it was, it's about time that we not be watching the Masters from 1970, right? The golf tournament. So people are starved for that content. The ratings for the draft, the NFL draft, which is somewhat static, were through the roof. And so we're going to have record TV ratings when these sports come back. The NBA will probably play maybe some playing games, but basically the playoffs. Baseball is going to go with an 82-game schedule. They're going to bring the players together for spring training in June, and then they would start the season in July. They would geographically group the teams for less travel. So you would have West Coast teams playing West Coast, you'd have Southeast teams playing Southeast. They would jiggle with the schedule a little bit. They're talking about no fans at this point, but let's see how it goes. I don't think we should be so closed-minded as to not understand that life involves risk. When you go outside your house and get in your car, there's risk there. There's risk when you go on an airplane in an ordinary time because everybody's coughing and sneezing. There just is risk, and we need some balance here.
Great, yeah, thank you. So I think that's a great segue to talking about the future. I think you started talking about the short-term future in terms of how to open up, with spectators, with some spectators, with no spectators, and so on. So a little bit of I want to tag on to something you said about creativity, which is that and fear. So when fear hits, you tend to set blanket rules, and of course, as you mentioned, the government ends up, having to do that to be safe or whatever it may be, because that's sort of the overarching way to get things done. But as we know in business, it's the creativity of business entrepreneurs and people who are in the trench lines like both of you. That's what triggers the true innovation, and particularly how to navigate this uncertain future and how to bring sports and entertainment back. So let me just pass it on to Valerie and her thoughts on how do you think we can come back? Because we will come back, entertainment will come back, and how can it come back in a way that is entertaining and safe? Any thoughts, Valerie?
Yes, I'd like to piggyback on some of the things that Lee said, because we're watching very closely what the sports side of this of live entertainment does. The NBA opens arenas, and that's the same exact locations venues that we're using to have events. So if those venues have been sanitized and are clean and are able to have an overall clean plan where they can, limit the number of people in restrooms, if they can make the fan pods or seating pods that I've seen some theaters have started to enact, and doing the temperature testing when you come in through the gate. They're already doing security testing when they come into the gates at major venues anyway, where they're searching purses and doing things like that. So the temperature testing could just be one more element of that same process. And I think that also the way that the buildings are cleaned between each event and the dressing rooms and things like that are also sanitized. Those things happen before each production comes into the venue anyway. So we then included inside of that the CDC guidelines for disinfecting of locations, the same things they're doing in nursing homes, hospitals, the airlines are doing it. If they did those same things between each performance that came into the venue, then again, we have, some way that people can then come inside of them. In terms of the crew that's working on that, those crews should also be tested. Make sure that when they come in to check in for work and they're given their credentials to work for the day, that their temperatures are tested. They're operating with gloves and face masks on. Some of the jobs are more difficult to perform with gloves on, but a lot of the workers, stagehands and things, wear gloves anyway. So if they're wearing, they're wearing work gloves usually, but if they were also, some kind of sanitizing process for the gloves as well, and that the equipment is contained, and that's your same equipment that you're using from tour to tour. I think that those kinds of things are precautions that we could do. When we have catering, we have a lot of things that happen backstage that I think, the general consumer doesn't realize that goes into a production going on. So there's meals and catering. And I think that, if we do away with the buffets and everybody goes to more individualized, prepackaged meals, that could be a way that we could then go on and do things. The thing that concerns me most about going back is the financial side of it. Because if the venues, when you figure out that a venue is based on, there's a P&L done for each show. So they figure out, these are the expenses of producing the show with the artist in there. What are the production costs and what are the advertising costs and the building costs? So once you figure out those things, they're based on seating and the capacity of the building. And that's how they figure out how much tickets should cost. Well, if that P&L has got to be drastically changed now because the capacity has greatly diminished, then it's then on the promoter and the entertainer to figure out if we change these deals that we are using to be able to put on a production. Ticket prices were already, at some of their all-time high based on the economy and so many people being out of work already. Are we ready to then come back with higher ticket prices because we have less capacity? Somewhere something has to give, or it's not going to be financially possible for us to come back. So we have to also factor in maybe something that's more of a artist, promoter, profit share kind of thing, rather than a direct guarantee of pricing based on, what the P&L shows, because no business is going to operate knowingly going into something that they know is not going to make money. So you can't say that, okay, the promoters should just take a loss and still pay because you won't have promoters and we won't be able to present these shows. So I know that the cost of putting on a show is going to increase just because we have to include those things that I'm talking about in terms of safety. Now we have to have another person that's doing the temperature, so that brings another person onto the staff. The equipment that's going to be necessary to take the temperature of 5 to 10,000, 30,000 people coming into a place. The time that it takes to do that, which means we'd have to open the venue earlier, which means the rental time starts at a different time. So, and then the maintenance of the building to maintain the bathroom so that we only let a few people into the bathroom at a time. They're sanitized in between. These are just some of the guidelines that Georgia has in place in terms of opening restaurants and schools and small venues and things like that. So to be able to do that is going to require more people and more hours. So that's going to raise the cost of doing a show, not lessen it, at the same time when we have less of a capacity. I was reading the other day that there's a venue that was in Arkansas, I believe, that had a normal capacity of 1,100 people. And they did a live show with people sitting in pods, fan pods. Basically, if you have 4 people that came with you to the show, then all 4 of you are sitting together, and then the social distancing from that, so that you have, you know, you're not exposed. You're with people that you know and that you trust, and that they're well, so y'all are all together, and then the rest of the people are social distance from you. That capacity down to 229 seats in a 1,100 seat venue. And in a comedy clubs already are very, very tight in terms of how many people can fit inside of them. So to get 350 people into one of them, which is one of the, you know, pretty good sized comedy club, to take it down to a capacity of 100 people, that's going to affect the revenue of that club. And most artists in comedy clubs are door guarantees. Their revenue, their income is based on how many people come in and what they charge. So those are all things that have to be very, very carefully examined in terms of what's happening. So I think in the future, we're going to see more creative types of arrangements between promoters and artists so that they can survive. You know, the Live Nations, AEGs of the world will be able to work out something. It's going to be difficult for them as well, but the small and medium size promoter, I think will be a very difficult comeback for them.
All right, great. Lee, anything you want to add to bringing entertainment and sports to safely, and anything, you know, maybe tag on to the financials, anything you want to add?
So financially, the sports, primarily except baseball, do a revenue split. So in football, it's 53% to owners, 47% to players. And so that equation, if we have no fans or limited amount of fans, we'll have a diminished gate, and then it will set players and owners negotiating for, if there's not the revenue there, then how do you work out already negotiated contracts, a lot of which have guarantees, and how do you make those financial adjustments? This is the brave new world, so we really don't know. I'm very optimistic as long as we can keep government and the media from terrifying people beyond what the real threat might be. I'm still waiting for the fellow who predicted 2 million deaths, you know, so many of these projections have been wrong. They've been inflated. I'm not minimizing the very real pain that people who get this have, or people who are out of work, but I'm just telling you that people are starved for sports, and I believe that they will come back in huge numbers if given a chance. In football, most of the stadiums sell out anyway, and they're waiting lists. So the point is, even if there were some people afraid, I think we have to calculate the spectrum of reaction among our fan base to this threat. So over here, you have people that are out shaming other people if they're not wearing masks, you know, and who are terrified. Over here, you have people who are relatively oblivious to the threat. And so you have a big spectrum going on. I believe that safety is the #1 concern. But for example, just think about a stadium. You already, as you walk into the stadium, get checked for contraband and all sorts of other things. It takes 2 seconds to take a temperature monitor and stick it next to somebody's head. I do it every time I go to my workout. And then you can have masks. The players can be tested. They can be isolated. They'll have the test kits. The ratings will be off the chart. So we've got 2 phases right now. But remember, there are people, I heard a woman on CNN last night, a doctor, say that it won't be safe to come out for 36 months, okay? Well, what country will you come back to? I guess is the question. So I think that we can be innovative. Let's take just our Asian Academy and Sports Career Conference. So we had 9 or 10 of them scheduled all across the country. They're scheduled to be live. So we've now converted that to doing it on Zoom. And so you can do things like that. But remember, some of the revenue for sports comes from fantasy sports. That will still exist. It comes from betting. That will still exist. It comes from merchandising and memorabilia. People go crazy over stuff that's got logos on it. All that will be there. So let's think of this in phases, that the very first sports that open may not have fans or huge numbers of fans. But as time passes along, we can be more and more open and adjust it based on what the situation is at the time. Let's remember one other thing. If when you go outdoors, it's much safer than when you're inside. First of all, you get sunlight, which helps raise your immune system. And second of all, the virus doesn't last as long. So if you put people in outdoor stadiums, as opposed to packing them into arenas, I think that the wind's blowing, they're very real factors. Yes, we should listen to medical experts, but we can't let their wildest projections shut us down. Remember that we've had COVID now, but we've also had SARS and avian flu and bird flu and HN21 and a variety of other things. And yes, I understand you can distinguish this, but if we wait for a vaccine, our country will be nothing like we've ever experienced. And remember that during the Great Depression, sports thrived. So people didn't have as much money, similar to today. People, a lot of people were out of work, but the way that you retain your sanity and the way that you retain some balance is by going to one of our shows or by going to a sports event. I mean, laughter is the best therapy for what we've all been going through. And so I think that it's necessary for the national psyche. You can trivialize sports and entertainment and say, you know, they're not important, but the key to opening the economy again is people having confidence that it will come back. So then they start to spend money, they start to plan for the future, all that. And we don't have that right now. And so we need national leadership and other people that say, within guidelines and safety, we can still flourish.
Right. Thank you, Lee. So one last, I want to have one last question, and we have just a couple minutes before we open it up for a Q&A. But I want to get a sense from you. Once, let's take post-vaccine scenario, right? Do you have any foresight on are we going to go back to live entertainment and sports as we knew it before the pandemic, or are some things going to change permanently? So any thoughts on that before we open up for Q&A?
Well, first of all, there's been massive innovation in terms of ways to bring fans closer to sport. So there are all sorts of apps. We've got a new VR project with Patrick Mahomes where you put on you put on a little headset, and now you're in Arrowhead Stadium with crowd noise, facing defensive, if you're the quarterback, facing defensive linemen rushing at you. And it's a real experience. So you feel you have a football in your hand, and based on what you can, how you throw it, you know, you either throw an interception or you get sacked, and it feels real. There are all sorts of things happening like that. Gambling in stadiums is on the way. I don't love it, but it's here, and you'll be able to place a bet like you do at pari-mutuel at a racetrack. And so first of all, television ratings have gone up in sports. They steadily go up. Not only is football, the NFL, the most followed sport in the country by 3-1 in polling they do, but it's also got 5 of the top 10 Nielsen nighttime rated television shows. So it's arguably the most popular form of entertainment. I mean, it beats you know, Blackish and American Idol and all those other shows every week. So TV will be healthy, and there's nothing that substitutes for a father taking his son to a baseball game and passing on that heritage. There's nothing that substitutes for the visceral excitement that comes from being in a packed stadium or arena watching a thrilling game. So it's woven into the way that we live, and I believe that it will come back stronger than ever because we're so starved for it. That you'll have great attendance where we permit attendance, and the TV ratings are going to be off the roof for the different sports, especially at the start when you actually have real sports programming.
Right.
I mean, outside of the 10-part Michael Jordan series and the draft, there's been virtually nothing.
Yeah. So, you know, actually, when you see reruns becoming very popular, you know there's a lot of pent-up demand, right? Valerie, any final thoughts on how the future looks like once the dust settles from the pandemic?
Yes, I think that the problem now is fear. So once we've taken away that fear and been able to put in a vaccine and other precautions that will prevent people from being able to get this without, you know, and still be able to enjoy themselves, I think certainly we'll have people coming back to it and coming back to enjoy it, because like Lee said, there's nothing like being able to be in the arena when everybody's laughing and enjoying it, or watching a concert and feeling the actual vibration of the floor because the music is that, you know, heavy, and you really are feeling that same, the energy that you get from the other concert goers. I think that it'll certainly be back. I think that the only reason that we're the way we are now is because there are so many unknowns. We don't know exactly how it's transmitted. We don't know exactly how it's going to affect you. We don't really know how long it takes for the disease to impact you. So I think that that's the only thing now that is keeping us from having anything, you know, because when there's any type of downturn, usually concerts and comedy and things like that are doing well because people want to be able to escape from whatever it is bad that's going on, you know. So they want to be able to go to a live event and see something. And I think that watching that on television is not the same thing. Yes, of course, we have successful television shows that show live concerts, but even a very successful stand-up special was a live event at first. You know, we did, you know, 9 episodes of the Shack All-Star Comedy Jam, and it was one of the most successful show series there. But each one of those were a live show. They were live to tape. So you can't do that without an audience. And I think that the audience wants to come back and be a part of it. You know, comedians need to be able to feel the energy from the audience. So you're not going to be able to have them so far back that they can't see or feel the audience. So I think that we'll go back to normal and people will be happy for it. I think that now it's education and marketing that has to happen now to let everybody know that this is just temporary. We won't always be this way, you know, and that everything that you used to having in America is not going to go away if you would just take a minute and let us get this thing under some kind of control, then we can go back to being our normal selves. And the longer we resist going into any kind of control where we can figure this thing out, the longer it's going to be before we're able to be back to normal. And if we can just get everybody on that page, I think that, we'll be able to work. I even think that they probably can have some outdoor concerts this summer, because we just need, that's where we'll have more flexibility with being able to social distance and being able to reconfigure the seating and to make things, the problem with festivals is that we probably haven't had enough time to plan them because they were all, everything was shut down. But concerts at outdoor venues and amphitheaters, I think they'd be able to work now. You just need to space out the seating. And like Lee said, there's fresh air and vitamin D and all that is there. We just can't all be, so communal. But I think the future is bright. We'll be able to come back.
Thank you. I tend to agree. And let me just add one thing, and then we'll open up for Q&A with Amy. I think that live sports and entertainment will be the poster child of how we're going to be able to open up successfully live events in general. It's because we're talking about sports, entertainment, theater, musicals, large conferences. Like I'm thinking, for example, as an institute, are we going to have large conferences, organize large conferences at the university? And if so, how? And I'd be looking to people like you to guide us, because I believe you will pioneer this and appreciate that. Okay, Amy, Q&A session. We have quite a few questions, by the way. Feel free to send more on the chat. We'll see if we have time. Our dear panelists have agreed to stay over a little more if there's some really interesting questions that are put forth to discuss.
All right. So tapping into what Nelson just said and what you guys were talking about, I find it interesting that communication is a challenge, right? How do we communicate and help people to not be fearful of going to these events? So who do you see taking the lead, since all of these live events are interconnected? Who's going to jump in first, and how are they getting that guidance?
I think sports is first.
Yeah.
I think sports will be they'll be, because they're bigger than anything. I mean, just like Lee said, the NFL is the biggest game out there. So we felt like that it was really happening. The shutdown was really happening when the NBA stopped playing. So I think that they have the biggest marketing machine, and they have the most steady fans all the time. So I think them giving the message that it's safe to come back to our stadiums and our arena will open the door for us to be able to do live entertainment events.
I think that we'll probably see baseball open up first, and the NBA and hockey simultaneously. I think the fact they're holding the events, and you can see that the players are together and yet still safe, will send messages to everyone. Football's already announced that they're going to have a regular schedule, and which starts September 10th, but they're going to have a complete 17, it's up to 17 games this year schedule. And the symbolic effect of that, when you start to see that there are fans in the stands and they're not getting the virus, and all the safety concepts that they're using, NFL facilities just opened up again. The NCAA allows now both basketball and football to open up under safe conditions for training camp. So college sports is has much more uncertainty, because college football hasn't figured out how to play yet. But the NFL is the straw that stirs the drink. And when you see that they have a regular schedule, that they're opening up their facilities, that they're going to have a fairly regular training camp, then the next issue is it safe to attend games? And after we don't see a spike in the virus when live events are held, because they're using a whole group of screening and safety techniques, then that will symbolically send a message to the country that, you know, like the scene in Wizard of Oz, where the Wicked Witch is there, but then eventually the little munchkins come back because it's safe. And I think, again, so much of this is mental, psychological, and emotional. So that if you're sitting at home right now watching CNN, then you believe the apocalypse is upon us. It's, you know, not that 80,000 people out of a country of 330 million have died. It's the world's a threatening and horrible, you know, frightening place. But when you see groups on television successfully navigating this, it will affect behavior.
So there's a lot of questions here about how do you get fans in the stadium? What does that look like, from insurance, liability, to putting in children, or how do they even like enter and exit, right? Those are the forms of the places where people will have to congregate. So lots there about how do you actually get people into the stadium?
So right now you have to go through screening at a stadium. You have to go through a metal detector. People can either pat you down or do the rest of it. So I think the first thing that happens is you'll urge people to come earlier so that you can spread out the crowd, and you'll tell a certain group of people they have to be there 2 hours ahead, and others an hour and a half. So you will thin out the amount of people coming in. Then you can take each person's temperature, those modern things that you just put up against your head for 5 seconds. It won't slow things down because they're already moving a little bit slowly. So that's how you get the crowd in. You assume a certain amount of risk as a fan. If you ever look at the back of the ticket, it's carefully worded in a legal sense to make sure that you understand that you could get hit by a foul ball in a game, that something could happen. So you already have assumed risk when you go. So I think that takes care of the insurance question, because you just, if people read the ticket, or if they're told that, then they come in. But and then in terms of a seating chart, you just take a seating chart for an arena or stadium, and you figure out, based on medical advice and expert advice, how is it safe to distance people. I mean, if you can put people on the beach out here, right? And they're already out there in large numbers, and somehow they've figured a way to social distance that makes it okay. Again, the question is, can you go to the thing with confidence? But I'm telling you that people are so starved for comedy, concerts, and all the rest of it, that, you know, it's going to be like letting kids out for recess. You know, they'll be there, and intelligent, creative minds can figure out how to do this. There's already logistics problems in terms of having fans. You can ask everybody to wear masks, and that provides an element of protection. And as Valerie mentioned before, you can blast out those arenas with cleaning and all the rest of it. I mean, my biggest concern would be how you navigate a bathroom, given the amount of beer that people drink and the long lines. You know, that could be a thing. But again, if you have to go to temporary toilets in the arena or the thing, you go to that. These are the logistical problems that bright minds, facilities managers, people that run a coliseum or run a arena have to deal with all the time. So they're pretty qualified to figure this out.
So I'm going to tie that and throw this back to Valerie with a couple of things. One, people are talking about when you're social distancing in an arena or stadium or a club, right? You're selling less tickets, so the cost of those tickets are going up. And so kind of spinning back to financials, have there been talks about hybrid models in person and maybe like a pay-per-view digital to give you that live experience? I know for the comedy stuff that can work, so I'm going to throw this to Valerie.
Mhm. Yes, there's ongoing conversations right now that are how do we work that out so that the performer is still earning a living wage, the promoters are able to still continue, and the facilities are still able to operate. The whole idea of profit sharing and the split idea of pay-per-views and paper watching, that kind of thing, those are things that we would think about and that we're having discussions about right now, because we know that ticket prices can't go but so much, higher, because we're also dealing with what is the economy right now. So what can the market bear? So we are working very closely with artists and promoters to figure out what is the best way to bring live entertainment back in a way that is palatable to the audience that we're serving.
All right. Lee, do you want to join in?
Right. So we're not going to do pay-per-view in sports other than UFC and boxing, because part of what creates these massive amounts of money, an NFL team receives $230 million each season, each team, just from the national television contract. So part of what's made the sport popular is if you've got $80 to buy a little television, you can watch it. So there always are talks about putting this Super Bowl on pay-per-view. If we're in February and people can't go live to the Super Bowl, I mean, I'd be surprised. It's just, what is the metric and standard for what has to happen with the virus for total opening? In other words, so is it that the cases plateau? Is it the fact that there's no cases at all? Is it the fact there's no cases plus months to make sure there's not a recurrence? We've got to have consensus on that and what the real risk is.
Great. So listen, we are about 3 minutes into the hour. We're going to ask one last question here, for hopefully for all of you in these last 3 minutes. But for those of you who want to stay, especially those of you who ask questions that we haven't answered yet, please hang in there. We're going to go probably another 10, 15 minutes after that. So Amy, ask the last question that I think will appeal to our students and early career professionals.
All right. So really, in light of everything we're talking about, what's your advice for job seekers, particular graduates, people looking to transition, who are looking to work in sports and entertainment? What's the new skill on the horizon that they really need to have in their resume?
In sports, as I said, at Pepperdine, we've held 2 sports career conferences. So we try to educate younger people breaking in. You can go to our steinbergsports.com website and find that. The most important skill is the ability to have vision and understand where the economy and where sports are going and where there are jobs. So someone can work for a team, a league, a conference, an athletic department. They can work in marketing, branding, PR. They can represent players. They can do facilities management. They can train players. There are a vast array of jobs in sports. So the real question is, how can you distinguish yourself? I mean, I get a couple thousand resumes a year. How can you distinguish yourself from every other job applicant? How can you create an opportunity? So I'll give you an example. Somebody sent as a Sports Illustrated copy showed up at our office. And it looked like Sports Illustrated. It was their font, it was their type, it was their pictures, it was everything. Only this Sports Illustrated had a picture of a young man and myself. And each article was cleverly written to talk about how our firm had been enhanced since he joined us. We hired him. because it showed creativity, it showed the ability to think outside the square, it showed mastery of visual skills, it showed research into what we did. Another time, I was given a speech in Waco, and that's where Diet Dr. Pepper comes from. And so to students and talking about that, well, about a week later, a bottle of Diet Dr. Pepper shows up, only instead of 1887, it's got 1975, which is when our firm started. And a picture of a young man and myself. You turn it around and now you have the ingredients. It's 100% perseverance, 100% creativity, 100% loyalty, on and on and on. We hired him. So my point is, can you figure out, can you get into the heart and mind of the person doing the hiring, figure out what their needs are, and figure out novel solutions or ways in which you are not replaceable, fungible, or modular. You are unique, and you bring a unique skill set to the situation. Things change very rapidly in sports. There are students out there that are going to work for firms and in industries that don't exist right now. So it's flexibility, adaptability, and a certain core set. It's not going to surprise anybody there that the ability to be pretty conversant with computer skills is key to everything.
All right, Valerie?
On my side of the table, I think that a person that is flexible and creative, because our things are constantly changing. And so I like to be in a room with someone that can say to me, have we thought about doing it this way? So I like to have young people around me that are constantly thinking about how this works. And I think that people should be multi-hyphenates. By that, I mean, I produce television, I produce live events, I produce, theatrical events. So you should be able to do more than one thing and not just pigeonhole your producing skills in one area. I'm not saying that you should be a jack of all trades and a master of none, but I think that a good producer is able to see things from very varying directions, because now convergence has made our content creation it could be anything. I think that, used to think that just things were taped. Now we have something called live to tape. Now we have reality shows. And are those things live events or are they taped events? So I think that being able to maneuver yourself in different parts of the world of entertainment is going to be your most valuable resource. And to be able to learn how all the different aspects of that particular production works, because just knowing how to hang the lights or just knowing how to do the sound may not be enough, because we may now be going to a point where we have a very smaller crew. So you need to be able to do more than one aspect of it in a post-COVID type of world. I know that when we start production back in July, we're going to have to work with more skeleton type crews. So somebody that can only do one part is not nearly as valuable as somebody that can do multiple things.
All right. I think a lot of the discussion in the question board is really about something you guys touched on earlier, which is the two ends of the spectrums, the people who aren't as worried about going out and attending an event, and the people who are really worried about attending an event. Mm-hmm. So you're trying to cater to both sides of that equation. And I think we talked a lot about how to get people in the stadium and what that would look like. But how do you get to the point where you're communicating and you're giving people a sense of it's safe to come in for those that are more concerned, or what's the solution for them?
I think that we have to make it safe. I think that if we can say that we're doing these things, then you'll feel safer about coming out. I watched the news program this morning. It was talking about the steps that Delta Airlines is taking on their planes to get people back to flying. And it was interesting to me because I have to move my artists around. So, when I hear them saying they're disinfecting the plane and then they're wiping it down and then they're giving people face masks and then they're giving you hand sanitizer, and the TSA has checked your temperature before you even get to that part of it, and you can't take food on the plane that's not in the clear container that people can see what it is. I think after you've done all those things, now I feel like it's safe for me to get on the plane. It's the same thing that we've done anytime we've had any other type of catastrophe or natural disaster. After 9/11, we had to make people understand it was okay to fly again. So I think that we have to show them that it's safe, and we have to do those steps for real and not just say these are the guidelines, but we kind of not following them, but we really are following them. And then when you go to buy a ticket, when you go on Ticketmaster or whatever the other ticketing outlet is, there's a list of things that tell you before you buy this ticket, know that we're going to check your temperature. You're going to have to wear a mask. You're going to have to, these are the things that are going to have to happen. We're having staggered bathroom breaks. You have to schedule the time that you're checking in. So if they know that going in, they know all of that before they buy a ticket. It's not a surprise. You don't get there to the stadium and get somebody that says, you know what, I'm not wearing a mask. Well, then you can't come in and upset everybody else. You have to follow these guidelines. So I think that is the part that that will make it safe for everybody, is everybody's willingness to comply with the things that we're having to put in place. We have to, one, notify everybody what the guidelines are that we're taking in place. And then we have to convince the consumers that are coming, those spectators, that they have to comply with those precautions for the safety of everybody so that people can feel safe again.
All right. Lee, anything you want to add?
No, I just echo what Valerie said, which is that all of the sports have great communication systems. They are able to spread information in a variety of ways. And by laying out what the safety precautions are and the fact they've been medically validated, and this is going to happen in phases, okay? So as time goes on, restrictions will relax. But at the start, what I'm telling you is that people are dying to go back to entertainment. Those people at the most extreme level of, I was walking this morning and a woman was 20 feet from me, and she looked at me like the fact I was in the same space, like I was the devil incarnate, and put on her mask and ran over to the other side. So we have to deal with the very real anxiety of the fact that this country's just sat at home in large part for a couple months. So you just lay this out and you say to people, here are all the safety precautions we're taking in this stadium. And we expect you part of your experience is going to be remaining safe. And we need you to do X, Y, and Z different things, and it'll be a little different. People have great adaptive abilities, and I think we're going to end up just being fine.
All right. I think I'm going to wrap up the questions now because we're at about 12:10. Nelson, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I mean, there's some questions in the chat, Lee, mostly directed at your thoughts about sort of the need to bring sports back ASAP. So some people are wondering, how do you reconcile the salaries, the millions of dollars in salaries of some players compared to those salaries of those who are in the trench lines, in the hospitals, the nurses, et cetera. And then along those lines, how do you reconcile, I'm just going to read it straight up so you can sort of respond to it. How do you reconcile those who have not been glued to what is being portrayed on the news, but have been hugely affected by the fatalities of this pandemic? It seems to be quite an elitist, removed perspective to continue to devalue those who are risking and losing their lives in times such as these.
We're not devaluing. We start out every discussion. I've started every interview I've done by saying our heart goes out to both people who've been affected with the disease or economically impacted by the fact that they don't have jobs to go to. What we're offering is some entertainment inspiration for those people. When you get to the issue of salaries, You know, early in my career, I offered to take less money for players if it meant that the ticket prices were more reasonable. And I've made that offer a number of times. The players could live on less. Obviously, they're making extraordinary amounts of money. But what has been the reaction of players to the coronavirus? Patrick Mahomes donated 100,000 free lunches to kids. The athletic community's been very, very active in giving money and time to help people that are suffering, people that are in economic need. You can go all around the country. I could take you city by city, and athletes have been in the forefront of trying to be sensitive to the fact that they know they are the beneficiary of largesse, but they've been out there taping PSAs, going to schools, going to hospitals, doing a whole variety of things, giving their money to try to help other people. When I talk about role modeling for athletes, part of role modeling is reacting to this crisis and understanding all the rest of it. When things were at their worst during the Depression, which is equivalent, sports was seen as part of the way that people managed to keep their mental health together in this. So this is not Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. Athletes are acutely aware of the fact that they are the beneficiaries of amazing things because of fans. And if we ever lose that, we'll lose sports. So just understand that these athletes, our athletes, are out there actively trying to help in this. And so it's not elitist, it's ticket prices are a function of supply and demand. So each time I offer to take a cut, or what I've told owners is, look, you should save 10 to 15,000 seats in a big football stadium each week for younger people and economically challenged people so that they have the opportunity to come too. But the problem is, in a sport like football, you could probably sell 250,000 season tickets, you know, in Green Bay or in the right city. So there's just huge demand. But we're not insensitive to the fact that people are hurting and all the rest of it. I happen to live in Orange County, which is in California, which is a little less affected, but I can imagine what it's like in New York, you know, or New Jersey or New Orleans.
Great. All right. So I think it's time to wrap it up. I really want to thank Lee and Valerie for offering their time and their knowledge and wisdom to address a really important phenomenon. You know, amidst this human crisis, we need to understand how we're going to come back, how the economy is going to come back, and you know, and I think, you know, understanding how entertainment and sports are going to come back hopefully will inspire us as
Now, can I say one thing?
Sure.
Just remember that sports and entertainment are a big source of employment. So when you're trying to bring back the economy, you know, you need to think about the people who work in concessions, the people who work at stadiums and arenas, the people that are impacted in all these ways. This will be an economic boom and will provide jobs and will provide economic stimulus by bringing this back, and will help exactly those people that hold those jobs that are most economically challenged.
All right. So on that note, I think it's time to end it. Thank you so much for attending, and stay tuned for a recorded version and probably an article from my end that wraps up the lessons that we learned today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right.